Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Craig Monroe. I'm the founder of Elegant Literature and the editor and judge for this contest. I am joined today by our most recent award winner, Adrian Vasiliu. I should have checked to see if I pronounced Vasiliu right before we started. That was on my list. Is it Vasiliu?
It's perfect. Yep.
I am joined today by our most recent award winner, Adrian Vasiliu, with his story for Timeless Terrors issue, Nigel. Adrian, thank you so much for joining me and congratulations on winning the contest. How are you feeling?
Thanks so much for having me, Craig. Yeah, I mean it's a mix of joy and excitement and a little bit of imposter syndrome dropped in there just to have it like the full range of feelings. But no, it's a great feeling and it's definitely going to be the highlight of my year so far.
I'm so glad to hear that. So this was your first publication with Elegant Literature. That's right, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, you won on the first time you got published. That's $3,000 award. It's fantastic. Have you had many publications in other magazines or in other places in your writing journey, or is this one of the first?
This is the only publication. I actually written only four short stories ever. And so those are my only works of fiction. And all of them were written for Elegant. All were submitted to Elegant. The first three got honorary mentions, so that was exciting. And this is the fourth, and it was, I guess, the lucky one. So
Well, it was a fantastic story, well deserving of the award. And so, I mean, that's fantastic to hear. So you're right at the start of your fiction journey, and your writing is fantastic. And of course, you now are an award-winning author, so I'm sure that we'll be seeing a lot more of your stories in other places as the years go on if you continue writing. Now, so for anybody that's just joining us or doesn't know anything about elegant literature and somehow got to this video, we are the first short story magazine to pay professional rates and to only publish new writers. In our first sort of, I guess, 4 years now, or coming up to 4 years, we put over $200,000 in the hands of new writers all around the world. We publish all genres, and all of the issues are available to read for free on the website, including the most recent issue including Adrian's story, Timeless Terrors. So we're going to be talking about Adrian's story today, and it's called Nigel. Nigel, if you want, or Adrian, um, if you want to give everybody watching a quick refresher on what your story is about in your own words, take 30 seconds, maybe to a minute, to just tell us what this story is.
yeah, absolutely. So it's a very simple story. It's a gothic inheritance coming back home story. The protagonist is a very cynical man who has been running away from the eccentricity of his family for all of his life, and after his uncle's death, he's now put in the position to inherit the estate and you know, auditing the estate, he finds out that there's a family vampire. So he then embarks on a journey of discovery alongside a very, I would say, serious butler slash, estate custodian named Johan. And then, what started more as a joke ends up in being um, a journey of understanding his family. And at the end of the day, it's a story about acceptance, about the fact that the harder we try to run from something, at some point we're going to have to deal with it, and the results might be surprising.
And it is a fantastic story. Definitely blends comedy and horror and gothic very well. So if you haven't somehow read it, pause this video, go back, read the story. Everything we're going to talk about makes a lot more sense. And I've got tons of questions about this. I really enjoyed the story. It definitely made me laugh. It was a really fascinating premise, and that twist absolutely got me. So I'm really excited to find out all about the inspiration behind it and uh, you know just the answer to all of my questions basically. But
Absolutely.
first, I'd like to know, what was it like finding, like, finding your name in the magazine and seeing contest winner beneath it? Were you where were you, and did you go and tell anybody right away? And what was your initial reaction?
So it's kind of you'll probably think this is lame. What I do is when I get a notification that the magazine is published, all right, it's probably around 1, 2 a.m. in Romania, so it's pretty late. So I got a notification, and what I do is I skip the table of contents, so I don't want to know, what happened. I just look at it, just scroll really, really slowly, and go through the honorary mentions because that's what I was aiming for. Because my previous ones got honorary mentions, so I would say, maybe this one makes it too, and it wasn't there, so it was a mix of disappointment and I wasn't necessarily that happy about it, but then I said, well, there's still a chance. So I go through the whole magazine, read all the stories, and when I end one story for the title for the next one, I just scroll easily so the title kind of comes up easy. I'm a really boring person, so I try to the excitement and anticipations are rare, so I try to do that. So I did that. I went through all the stories, and I think mine was about the seventh or eighth. So it was kind of a long scroll, and I was kind of already dealing with a little bit of disappointment. And I was like, it's fine, everything's good. And then I just saw Nigel, and I was like, no. And then I scrolled and saw my name, and then I saw contest winner, and yeah, I think some manly squeals and some jumping up and down happened, and you know um yeah, that was my reaction. It was completely mind-blowing. Yeah, so um what I did next is I just
Went
my,
went
my
to sleep.
girlfriend was asleep. No, I was like, I wanted to share with somebody but not look too excited about it, so my girlfriend was asleep, so I went into the bedroom and kind of made a little bit of noise, like, oh, I just slammed a door. Oh, sorry, you're awake. Oh, by the way, check this out. And I showed her on the phone, and obviously she got excited. And then we wrote your judge's notes together, and it was just, yeah, it was great. It was I couldn't go to sleep afterwards. It was a long night. It was great.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I guess the time zone does. I never really thought about finding out about being the contest winner at 1 in the morning and having to wake people up to tell them the news and then try and go to sleep. That'd be difficult. Well, that's a
No,
lovely
it was
story.
it was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you for sharing that with me. And that's the kind of thing that makes me really happy about being able to do what I do and give this award. Well-deserved story. Um, so, before we get into the story specifically, I was just wondering about you. You mentioned that the four short stories that you have written were all submitted to Elegant Literature, and you got honorable mentions for the first three, which is fantastic right out of the gate. And of course, the contest winner on the fourth story is a very good and fast rate of success for this kind of thing. Do you have experience? I meant you mentioned your bio that you have, and now I've lost your bio, that you do have a visual storytelling experience. What background do you have in writing? What background do you have in storytelling, and how did that play into sort of being able to write so well for this short story prompt?
Sure. So I'm a graphic designer by trade. I now work in the corporate environment, which is a bit different from what you expect from a kind of a creative field. And I read and I wrote. I, I mean, I read a lot of nonfiction, and I wrote some nonfiction because you basically write presentations. You sometimes write stuff for public speaking. Selling materials and so on and so forth. So I always, being a graphic designer, you always work with somebody else's content, which at times can be frustrating. So whatever chance I got to use my own content in whatever projects I was working on, I was really excited. And it was nonfiction, but I was surprised by how many elements of basically design principles apply to writing. It's almost like you can take parts of the um, designed visual storytelling and apply them to a written story. And I'm thinking about, structure, like having a hook, hierarchy, the way you want to highlight some things. How do you do that? You do it in one way visually, but you can apply the same principle and just do it just by using words and using structure. So um, that's kind of like my background. So I've been writing nonfiction for a while, just as part of my job. But yeah, so I kind of found that with with fiction is a lot more fun. Obviously, it's I would rather do that than writing sales pitches um, but I found the transition I found it surprisingly easy in a way. It's just a matter of polishing and then finding the right words and thinking about the audience, thinking what the brief was. But there are a lot of similarities between those
I love how
fields.
you call it the brief. The
It's the prompt.
contest
I
prompt is the brief.
apologize.
That's coming from the business, the creative business
Yeah,
background. You get the brief and you execute the project accordingly. And you definitely did. I like what you mentioned about some of the principles of the design and visual storytelling, like the hook crossing over into story. And you had a great hook right from the beginning. The first sentence of the story, that would be the allowance for the family vampire, Sir Johann said, his voice lively as a throng of stuffed birds lining the walls of the study. I think that's one of the better first lines of a story I've read in a long time. It just right away, you just you're like, what is going on here? There's humor in there, there's absurdity, there's the promise of some interesting story and a premise going on, and it definitely drew me right in. I'm sure it drew a lot of the readers in, and that's such a good way of thinking about it is we often talk in story craft about the first line in the first paragraph in the first page in the first 5 pages, which need to draw your reader in, and thinking about it as the hook in terms of graphic design and visual storytelling is a great way to kind of approach it, and you definitely executed the brief well, that's for sure.
that's my favorite line. It's always the first line that I have in my stories. It's always the favorite line uh, in the whole
The first line of
storytelling.
your
And
of every story that you've written has always been
yeah,
your favorite line.
it yeah, until now it's always been the case. So and I think you have a great point there just by seeing kind of the connections between some simple design principles that you apply to a first line, for example. So in this case, it would be contrast, right? You got to have something because if you would said, oh, we have a family, oh, we have a vampire, then where's the I don't know the absurdity of it. I mean, if you add allowance next to it, it's like, well, those words shouldn't be together, right? And then
Vampires are usually
you
the
have
ones giving an allowance, if anything, because they're the
yeah,
older, they're the elder.
yeah, and they usually take stuff from you in other
Yeah,
forms, not
that too.
they're not gonna ask for your lunch money. They're probably gonna bleed you to death. But I those are the little things that kind of I find joy in polishing and thinking about the right word and changing the wording and making sure that there's enough. I mean, the first line should do a lot of work, in my opinion. It's one of the most hardworking lines I think that you can have. So making sure that it does a lot of work without becoming cumbersome, I think it's kind of a hard thing to do, but I love it. I enjoy it.
So would you say that you spend like how like versus the rest of the story, how much time did you spend polishing that first line?
So actually, I have a because I'm a new writer. What I do is I can't really continue writing until I have the polished first line and at least half of a paragraph. Until that's what I consider to be the right one. So basically, after I have the idea in my mind, I just have like this compulsive need to have the first line set in stone, and I usually make it bold. I make it larger because I have my little dorky document formatted and everything's, aligned and all that stuff. So I make it like really bold so I can always see it and make sure that the way I wrote the first line translates well throughout the story. So if I'm getting too serious, I'll just glimpse up at the first line, and you can feel that there's a little bit of playfulness there. So the story shouldn't get too dark. So yeah, I would say I spend a lot of time on the first line and on first paragraph.
That's a really interesting approach, really nailing that down and getting it exactly how you want it, and then using it as your reference point while writing the story. That, and my background is I was schooled in creative advertising, and we did a very similar thing when we were working on
Nice.
like a client project. We'd do our research, and then we'd have kind of their brief, like what they wanted at the top, and we'd do our research according to that. And once we kind of had the idea for a campaign, that would get stuck at the top, and everything you did after that, from the copywriting to the visual design to anything that was incorporated in the project, you're always referring back to that sort of the brief and the creative directive that points you in the right direction. And that's it's basically what you're doing with the approach to the story.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and that's kind of when I want to write about something, I need to have some sort of, if not dialogue, at least some sort of scene, like something happening, like a little glimpse of what's to come, right? I can't really think about starting with, I don't know, the description of the estate and the sun blending with the, you know, um, clouds and something that I just need to have like a pinpoint thing that's crucial for that story, and I gotta have that quote unquote scene in my head and just put that down on paper. And as long as I get there and I can pin that first line in that first paragraph in, then I think it makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah. And it certainly worked this time. It drew me in, and it was it's a great line. It's the one that stuck with me that I was thinking about, days later, going, that story was so cool. And that really drew it in. And speaking of contrast in the first line, we're talking about the allowance and the vampire, and kind of the absurdity of the statement contrasted with Johann's dry voice, the way he stuffed birds, is a great description. That contrast continues throughout the story in a lot of ways, right? You've got humor and absurdity contrasted with the sort of horror and gothic element pretty much back and forth the whole way. Or the first half is a bit more humorous and the second half is more horror, but it's kind of all there. Um, What's the question here? Um, yeah. So, how conscious were you of balancing the comedy and horror? Is it the same thing as you're talking about? Very deliberate, just working off the brief of the first line, just trying to keep everything balanced, or did it come out sort of naturally? Is it sort of your style to write that way, or how did this come about? How intentional?
I think it's a mix. Obviously, I think it's too soon to say that that's my writer's voice, because I think I would be a bit arrogant to say that I have a writer's voice after, 4 works in fiction. But it came naturally. It's something that it comes easily to me to add a bit of humor, for example, in a very dark situation. But in the same time, I make a conscious effort not to fall into either of them and just keep them balanced and see what works and what doesn't. And in this case, the plan was to start as a joke, so that's that way, to be considered more of a joke. And in that way, you have a bit more contrast at the beginning in the first half of the story, and then slowly kind of make the story a bit darker because because of the theme or the prompt. um, so you can see this gradient of going from almost comical to more dark and gray, dark, black, and then but in the same time it needs to be feathered. So you need to have like the combination of humor and horror all the time. The difference between them shouldn't be, uh, very what's the word that I'm looking for? Jarring. So there's always a blend of them, but and then coming kind of full circle, the ending is more on the humorous side, even though it has like a pretty, I would say, almost spiritual conclusion to the whole experience, but said in a humorous way. So
Yeah. And it was expertly done. I would not have uh, guessed that you had only written four pieces of short fiction before, because the writing quality was high, but the structure and the way you're talking about having feathered in the gradient of the the transition from the comedy to sort of the more dread is like that in my mind when I've been thinking about this story before coming on and talking to you. That's kind of how I see it, is almost like a descent, like it's kind of light and airy and a lot of fun, and it descends into this sort of more intense and epic and sort of horror themes. And you write about the descriptions of the mansion and all the fun things that are going on in it. I don't know how much color words that you actually used in that, but it felt very colorful and vibrant. You were referencing flamingos, you were referencing like the feather on the Templar armor and things like that. And as we get into the crypt, it did feel like color was bleached out. And I don't know if you started using more sort of shade and tint words and vocabulary in there, or if it was just the general feel of the place. And then, of course, that actually really worked well for sort of the glowing blood coral tree. Uh, Felt very vibrant amidst that black atmosphere. And I was kind of I didn't really articulate that as well to myself as I just did kind of here talking about it, but that's the way it kind of felt in my mind as the flow of the story and seeing these colors. Did you use a lot of color words and switch to shade and tints, or is it just
it
the
was
general
it
atmosphere and
was
feel of the piece?
yeah, it was kind of a general atmosphere because but like you mentioned, the way I saw it in my head was like getting darker and darker, both in subject and both in atmosphere. So in a crypt, it was clear that the there's going to be a lot of contrast between the environment and Nigel, who's like you said, a coral like bloody tree. So that would be the only color that's there. But I wouldn't say necessarily that it was a conscious use of wording for, instead of using colors, using more on the shade parts. I think it was more of a natural
Might have
way
just
of
happened because that's
describing.
what you're looking at and describing.
Yeah, more. Yeah, but that's well said. Yeah, but in the same time, I didn't want it to be, because there's a line in there and that I enjoyed writing again was when I was describing the chapel. There's a personification of light. It's like the light was trespassing and it was kind of crawling through the windows. And at that time, that's where the kind of like the feathering came in, because I felt like the protagonist is not gonna see it like that. I mean, he kind of will have some sort of poetic side to it, but um, that's not the way he would describe it. Like he will not personify light. So I added in there. There are a couple of words that said unnecessary, through the unnecessarily red windows, which is just a little hint that he thinks that is, why would you have red windows in a
Something
chapel,
going
right?
wrong
So just,
here. Yeah.
yeah, just adding, kind of cutting through the seriousness of the situation a little bit, so it doesn't get too dark too soon.
Nice. Yeah, very thoughtful. I like how thoughtful you are about even your word choices, and you're very, very conscious about exactly what you're writing and how you're structuring it. I love that. Let's talk about Nigel, because I'm pretty sure that everybody watching this is like, Craig, ask about Nigel. We need to know about the vampire tree. And I've drawn it out long enough. We're here now. We've descended into the basement. We want to know about Nigel. Um, it's a family vampire. It is a wild subversion on the familiar vampire trope. Um, it's like a coral like blood tree with a basically a crystalline not fang claw kind of thing that
Branches
comes
like
out and strikes them. Very very interesting and unique kind of take on it's a very unique creation in general. It's not just taking something else and kind of slapping vampire label on it. And there is, there's similarities to the vampire mythos, but not at all one to one. It's not like Twilight taking vampires and now they sparkle in the sunlight instead of burning up, right? Like it's now a tree, it's drinking blood from the roots and it's got like the memories of everybody in it. This is a really interesting creation. Where did this come from?
Yeah. So first of all, it came from your prompt. It was right there. I think one of the lines in the prompt was vampire feeding on your entire bloodline.
Oh,
So I
sweet.
just took that. For me was like when I read it, I was like, that's interesting because I'm from Romania, we have a vampire in our country brand. So I thought it was kind of funny, but in the same time, I thought it was a terrible idea to use that. Um, because vampires are just, the trope so overused and in some cases badly reinterpreted. And usually you expect, handsome people being vampires and love stories and all that, which I don't think it's what it
They're
should be.
either
So
Yeah, they're either handsome, they're either like stunningly beautiful or like fanged demons like crawling around on the ground, and
yeah,
there's not much in
yeah, it's
between.
just the extremes and it's just,
I'll tell you what they are though. They're usually humanoid.
yeah,
They're
that's right.
usually not
Um,
shaped like trees.
yeah, yeah. So um, when I decided that this is going to be either a good idea or a terrible one, I decided let's make it a good idea. So, but from the start, I was adamant that it's not going to be a human form. So it's going to be either a vampire. You're going to use it as a metaphor, but that I kind of dropped that idea pretty soon. So I was like, I want some sort of monster in there. So um, once I had that, I just used like I don't know if you use it, but I use mind maps, which is
Okay.
basically the simplest way to come up with stuff without overthinking it. So I just jotted down. I think it was timeless and then terrors because I wasn't necessarily 100% sure that the vampire thing would work. And then if you start writing what this timeless means, you're gonna eventually get to memory, immortal, and then if you go to terror, you're gonna have monsters and vampire will always gonna show up there. And then if you do the same thing for bloodline, for example, you're looking at blood, which is red, with then I usually look at images of what that means. And the human circulatory system looks like almost like a tree sometimes if you're looking at it, if you zoom
Uh,
in some of the veins. So I put those little images and those little snippets here and there. And then what does line mean? Generational, it means, and you'll eventually get to family tree. You'll 100% get there. So you
right.
have family tree, and then you're just looking at this like map of words that, and you're getting drawn to and certain words from each branch, and you're starting to make connections. And it was family tree was 100%. I thought it was a great direction, and then it was blood on the other side. So it was like a tree that is red, great, but is it a
Okay.
tree? Is it, that will work. And then when you're looking, I'm using a lot of references. So I'm looking at imagery of everything I write. So if I write red tree, I just look for a red tree. How does that look like? And I knew it has to be a living one, so it's not going to be a dead one or a very old one. And then again, you come up with little connections like that, and then coral looks a lot like a tree if you're looking at that. And I kind of look what coral does, and coral actually provides shelter for a lot of marine life, so it actually provides something. And then I was, well, what if this vampire actually, he takes something, he feeds on blood, but what if he also provides something? And then you go back to your mind map and you see memory and you see, immortality. And well, what if the trait is I'll provide you with all the memories of your ancestors in and you're gonna provide me with blood. And that was, and the visual was really easy to reach once, I started kind of branching out, to use a fun uh, from, bloodline and generational tree and all that.
Wow, that's really cool. Hearing your thought process behind that and how you use the mind map just it blows me away. Obviously you gave how much time do you think you spent maybe on that process that you just described? Like is it a matter of like it can't be as little as like 20, 30 minutes. Like it's got to be a few hours at least if you're
No,
going down
yeah,
rabbit holes like you went from timeless and terror and you somehow got on to coral and how it provides to marine life. So must have been a pretty sizable amount of time to get down those rabbit holes and explore all these things.
I would say usually it takes the research that I do, which is, not necessarily research, just kind of
Yeah.
trying
Sort
to
of having
get
fun
into
with
the
the creative
story.
process. Yeah.
Yeah, it usually takes a couple of days at least. And when I say couple of days, probably let's say 2, 3 hours in a day. After work, you're thinking about it, you're looking at imagery, you're getting, like you said, on the in the rabbit hole, and you find out stuff about trees that, I found out that they're the oldest living things on Earth. So I said, that's perfect. It matches exactly what I'm trying to say. It means that you can encapsulate a lot of memories and so you find these little things. So I would say probably a couple of days, depending on how quick you get to the solution that works for you.
Well, no wonder you're winning the contest. You're spending all that time, like really meticulously finding the most interesting bit for the prompt and the most interesting premise, and then crafting that first line so good, and then writing everything else with such a thought for contrast and structure, and referring back to the brief no wonder the story is so good, even though you may be very new on the path to your writing journey. You're already doing a lot of things right here. And obviously it paid off because how fantastic the story was, and you now won the award with it. Um, Love to see that kind of thing in action. I want to use that sort of mind mapping.
It's so
I've
much
used mind
fun.
maps before, but hearing the way you explain that seems like there's so much power, and I feel like a lot of people could be benefited from learning about that. So hopefully lots of people watch this video and say, that's such a great idea. I'm going to copy Adrian. Um, so really, really great monster. Love knowing the thought process behind it and the whole creation of it. Very unique, very fascinating. Why Estonian blood? Like, do you? Nigel's been feeding on Estonian blood, and then the ending of the story is kind of like he doesn't like Estonians anymore.
Like
Like, let's get him
yeah,
Good British blood. What's going on
yeah,
there?
yeah. So that's part of the, I mentioned like I like to have things that hint at things without saying them, and it comes back to contrast. So the protagonist wants to be completely different from his, kind of eccentric family. He thinks himself as being modern, nothing like. But I wanted him to have some sort of that archetypical, almost like xenophobia that, old families, rich families have. So I didn't want him to be that far away from his family, but he doesn't even realize it. So that's why at the beginning he says, "What's wrong with British blood?" That's one of the first questions that pop into his head. It's not like, "Hey, you have a giant." He didn't know at the time it was giant, but you have a vampire in the basement, so that should kind of like put you off. But his words were like, why is it Estonian? It's not British. What's wrong with British? Like that sense of entitlement and superiority kind of came through a little bit. And Estonia, because I have friends from Estonia, I know them, and they're so
I thought
different
it might be you
from,
have enemies in Estonia.
no, no, no. They're the people that I know are great. But it's such a cultural difference between them that I thought is kind of exaggeration works. Because I wanted to drop these little hints in there, but and but obviously you needed to exaggerate them a little bit so they become a bit clearer. So that's why at the end, um, he says we're gonna look for another supplier. locally because he's thinking that hey, we're British, we're superior to everyone else, so we're gonna go that route. So it was a kind of a very subtle way of characterizing the protagonist.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can see that the very aristocratic nature of him. I just it stood out to me because here in where I live in Canada, somehow in the last couple of years, I've fallen into a group of like a large portion of my friend groups are our friend group is Estonian, my close friends. They're all Estonian. So I went to them after this story saying, "Hey guys, like this vampire tree is drinking your blood specifically, but it's not good enough for them." I don't know why really, but they're like, "Oh, hey man." So it was a lot of fun just on a personal side for that. I'm in no
Yeah.
way Estonian. I just have a bunch of friends that are. Um, so moving from Nigel to sort of the overall setting of the place, the estate. What an eccentric place. I love the little descriptions of his childhood, sort of the flashbacks and all these crazy things that are happening there. Um, did you invent that atmosphere pretty much from scratch or just from sort of general references, or are you pulling on some real eccentricities that either you know of or saw in movies or something? Where did all the little fun details that are all absurd come from?
Yeah, so I have a strange memory, so I usually pick up and remember a lot of useless things. So a lot of it comes from scenes in movies, little I think it was a documentary about flamingos, and one of the flamingos in that documentary was really aggressive. So I kind of in my mind I remember this little detail of being attacked by a flamingo, which it's just adds to the absurdity of it. And part of it is comes from I would again look at visual references. So when I was talking about, I knew that the scene will start in a study. I'm looking at old studies, like Downton Abbey kind of stuff. And then when you look into the history of those places that you're kind of looking at, you can find all sorts of characters. And usually there's almost always some sort of a crazy story going on, either a party, somebody who set the place on fire, somebody, I don't know, wearing armor around the castle. So all those little kind of references, I wanted to gather all of them and put them together and obviously exaggerate them. Um, so again, it will kind of build the character of the late uncle. But a lot of it is visual references that I just get. So for example, if you're looking at castles or mansions, you're gonna see armors all the time.
Yeah.
And usually they have these colorful um, feathers and they look ridiculous and I just kind of take note of those little details and add them in. Like the taxidermy wolf was actually coming from I saw a family that I think they had on their crest a wolf, and the sleds that the children use in the winter had a wolf head because they were really royal, I guess, or whatever. So
Yeah,
I
right.
thought that little detail it was great. So I just pick from references that I'm looking at and kind of from the research.
And does that come from your background in visual storytelling, do you think, or is it just how your mind works in the visual sense?
I think it comes from how my mind works in a visual sense because I have, and I think this is a bit weird, but I have a hard time imagining things if I don't see them. So in my mind, I have, for example, the picture uh, of an armor with peacock feathers. But it's hard for me to put my finger on it. So I'll look for that imagery, and once I have that imagery, I can easily describe it, and words just come. You see a reflection of light on the metal, or you see the texture of the feather, or things that I don't have the imagination for.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I have a similar I can imagine some things. I have one where like I basically have a really hard time imagining faces. So when I read a novel, I can get right into it, and I forget that I'm reading words and I'm watching the movie in my head, which is a lot of fun, and I love that. Please don't interrupt me when I'm reading because I'm in the middle of watching a movie. But the problem for me is that the characters, none of them have faces because for some reason, I can't picture faces, and so, but like what you're saying is, if I've seen a movie of the work, so like I'll read a book and then I'll watch the movie that was the adaptation that was made. And then when I read the book the next time, all the character faces are the faces of the actors from the movie. And now like I see them. And sometimes that's fine because I'm like, yay, now I can see the faces. And sometimes I'm like, I don't agree with that with that portrayal of the character at all. But now that's what I see when I read the book, and it's really frustrating. So I guess it's sort of the same thing in a bit of sense there. Although I often find that I can imagine armor because I come from a fantasy background. So I do that all
Oh,
day, every
that's
day anyway.
awesome.
Um, just from reading books. Okay. My other question is, I think I touched on this in my comments as the judge, but the ending where they drink, they drink tea, very British. And also it's a very calm, subdued scene right after that kind of cosmic alien intensity. What made you choose to end with that sort of tonal quietness?
So I knew how it's going to end. It wasn't. I knew from the beginning that I want some sort of.
First
I
and
think you
last line
mentioned.
is a family vampire, and then they finish with drinking tea. That's all you had?
Yeah, it was not necessarily with drinking tea, but I knew I wanted to be some sort of de-escalation and some sort of, again, coming back to the contrast of after the craziness of what's going on, because the whole situation is absurd, crazy.
Yeah.
I wanted it to end on a almost like casual discussion between, they were two men in the chapel drinking floral tea and having a casual conversation. So the point of that being that I think nothing that we kind of experience in life is black or white. There's a healthy amount of gray in between. So I knew that if I want to be extremely dramatic and maybe end it with something extreme, that the protagonist would, took an axe and chopped at the roots, cut the tree down, separate himself from his family in a, um, fountain of blood, and then he would just be done with it. I thought that's not what happens in real life. I wanted to have some sort of humanity and to ground the story because it was so absurd to have some sort of a normal reaction. Because usually what we do as humans, we, kind of look at the situation and transform. And I think this was one of the things that you wrote in your note, in your comments. We usually take an extraordinary situation, and to deal with it, we almost transform it into something normal. So the ending was more of a sign of acceptance, but in the same time of, a sign of human nature, where we are taking situations that are extraordinary and we just deal with them, we live with them, it it becomes our normal. So I thought it was a that's what I wanted the story to become like. We're gonna deal with whatever comes our way. He's accepted that, okay, so now I guess I'm in charge of a vampire. It's all good. I'm gonna think about the logistics of it, and he kind of accepts it. And um, there's a certain, in my eyes at least, a certain beauty in that acceptance and that transforming something extraordinary into something almost casual. And I
Yeah.
think it's just human.
Oh, I'm glad I got it right with the comments. Sometimes when I write those
Yeah, it
things, I
was it
worry. I'm
was
like, I
great.
could be interpreting the story completely wrong. I hope I'm not offending the author by making these comments, and there's always a bit of a worry because
It
I
was
don't
spot
know.
on.
Okay, very, very glad to hear that. Yeah, and so when I first read that ending, I felt it was a little jarring, but there was humor in it, and I kind of chuckled and laughed through. And then as I thought about it, I went, oh, okay, and all of those things you said kind of fell into place a little bit, and I really think it was a great ending for it. So a lot of good. Um, it, listening to you talk about this, it's like I think a lesson that we can all take away from reading your story and from hearing your thoughts behind it is there's a great deal of power in using contrast intentionally within your story. You've got it in the first line in within the sentence itself. You've got it within the structure of the story from the beginning to the end. You've got it from scene to scene and from like the climax to the de-escalation. Like you're kind of constantly using contrast as a way to highlight and kind of elevate both bits, no matter where they fall. And there's no question in here. I just want to reiterate that and kind of state it for anybody watching it and for myself for sure, is that that's such a great technique to keep in mind while you're writing, rather than just sort of, blandly going or throwing a twist out of nowhere to try and shock the reader. What you're looking for is a really effective use of contrast to make the reader engaged and think and highlight the differentness of the pieces. I think that's a very effective tool. Not necessarily that you might always want to use it, but I think a lot of the time, especially in a piece like this, very, very well done. Yeah.
Very well said, and I think it applies very well to characters as well. So, for
Mhm.
example, in this case, the uncle, right? He seems like he's almost borderline insane. He's full of life. He does all these things, but then in the memories, we find out that he actually lost a child, right? And then he has this his child's favorite toy was a small red horse, and then you go back to the ceiling painting that's so absurd of little horses, and but I think this contrast between what characters are and what characters can not what we think characters are and what characters are if that makes
What they
sense
really are.
is
Yeah.
yeah, it's nice to show some duality there. I mean, it's something that's a technique that's really used. Like, if you have a university professor whose hobby is reading, then sure, it makes sense. If you have a university professor whose hobby is collecting hunting knives, you already have a story, right? So it's
That's
kind
a
of
that's a good base for a story.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
No,
a
but well said. You
I guess.
verbalized it very well.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess contrast too would be a good way of brainstorming. You're using the mind maps, but for writers who are stuck on the prompt, like if you read the prompt for any one of our contests or issues, it's designed to hopefully jog your imagination and give you ideas. I'm really glad you're one of the very first people that's kind of really said, "Oh, the idea for this story came straight from one of the lines of the prompt." That is, like that's what I'm writing the prompts for, is to try and at least send you down paths in different direction to find things. Like a vampire feeding on your entire bloodline. I was, of course, kind of thinking of a regular vampire just sticking around and keeping you as pets and just constantly eating you throughout the generations. You've taken that and went down a path to create this very memorable monster, this very unique kind of story and setting, and that's fantastic. Really glad to hear that. But for some writers, every prompt they get stuck. Like they read the prompt and nothing jogs their imagination. They say, "I'm not sure what to do here." And thinking of that sort of contrasting, like maybe using the mind map and looking for contrasts, could be a very good way to brainstorm and ideate new potential stories for the prompt. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, so I can't. So, no, I won't preface this question like that. I will just ask you outright. Are there any authors or works specifically that inspired you in terms of this story with the tones of comedy and horror, absurdity and dread? Is this indicative of your regular style? And are you inspired by these people and you always write like this? Or is this story kind of unique I know this is a question, out of the four that you've written, are
Yeah.
you set in your ways? But who inspired this story and who inspires you in general is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm also kind of a beginner reader of fiction. So I feel like sometimes that I'm inadequate when discussing literature and works, and I feel like I'm way behind. But
Gonna make
I
a
would
lot
say
of people mad.
probably
I haven't read anything. I've just started writing and I've won the award. People are like, hey man.
No, I mean it's that would be yeah, that didn't happen. But I would say anything from Neil Gaiman, anything from Terry Pratchett. I've read their work, and I I kind of try to write stuff that I would enjoy, if that makes sense. So um, there's this commonality between these, like you mentioned, four short stories that I have written that somehow that quote unquote voice comes through. So there's always going to be a little bit of humor there. It's something that I enjoy a lot, and it's something that I think humor and horror, for example, are like cousins. It's like it's such a natural thing to have together. I was doing some research, and at some point, I was looking at soldiers, for example, who are in these horrifying, stressful situations, incredibly, um, uh, extraordinary and scary, and almost all the time, their first reaction was to crack a joke. You would, it's one of our ways of dealing with very serious situations. So I think, and again, I think this is my way of handling life in a way. When I'm feeling uncomfortable, when I'm nervous, or I just make some terrible jokes that help me. So I think it's kind of a mix from some of the authors that I enjoy because they have that sort of blend between humor and fantastic stories, and then it comes from personal experience because that's what I found. It helps me to sprinkle some humor on every situation, and it sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't, but most of the time it works. And then it's just like the human nature. That's how we go over a lot of stuff. So this comes back to the grounding of the stories and kind of uh, that's where the humor comes from. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I was rambling for a long time, so I apologize.
No, no, no. You absolutely answered it. And I mean, my questions are just the goal is to get you rambling anyway, and just hear your thought process behind this. So, yeah, I can definitely see kind of the inspirations of Gaiman and Pratchett. I assume maybe you've read. I'm guessing you've read Good Omens then. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, I've watched the show years ago when it came out, and I just read Good Omens last month, I think it was, and it very much marries some absurd humor with a very
Yeah.
fantastical story. It's very different from yours in a lot of ways, but I can see how that kind of general mixture of humor and story is an inspiration for you. Um, I have some silly questions that I think I'm going to skip in the interest of time. Um,
Oh
but
no, I love these questions.
so okay, well, one of them was what what kind do you have any strange or absurd details from your own life that you might like to work into some of your stories? Like, was there anything of your own life in Nigel, and have you used strictly from the humor aspect, I would guess. Is there any kind of like outlandish story that happened to you or a situation you were in that you would love to put into a story?
To be honest, my life is not that interesting. I would love to have like these sort of stories, but I definitely have humorous stories that are just everyday little details. So, for example, I'm 100% sure that if I would write a love story, I'm sure that the protagonist, right before he, you know, meets his chosen one, he will probably spill coffee on his shirt, or he would, trip coming down a set of stairs, or I don't know, something like that. So there are little anecdotes that I kind of use from my own experience. Strange stuff like that or awkward stuff always happens to me, so I usually draw from that, and obviously I need to exaggerate them because
Yeah.
you know my life is not that interesting, so it's not gonna make a good story.
Yeah, there's always little anecdotes that we can pull from our own life, even if we exaggerate them. It
Yeah.
makes me think of uh Jason not Segal. Anyway, the guy who stars in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and he's in How I Met Your Mother. If you've seen either of those, but it doesn't really matter. He got a chance to write his first movie that he got to write himself, and he pulled from something that happened to him in his own life where he got broken up with while he was naked, just like eating chicken. And in the movie, he walked into a room and he's naked and he's eating chicken nuggets, and his girlfriend breaks up with him. And that was apparently pulled right from his real life. And he said that when it was happening, partly he was like, "Oh my God, I'm being broken up with," and partly he was like, "This is gonna make such a great, hilarious scene for a movie. I'm getting broken up with while I'm naked eating chicken nuggets. This is going straight into a movie." And he said it's a very weird kind of dichotomy of thought in that, very contrasting thoughts in that in that moment for him, and it translated right onto the page and was a very memorable scene. So I think in our life, and that's an extreme example, obviously, um,
Sure.
but I think in our lives, there's always things that happen to us that we can kind of,
Yeah. Do you
yeah,
draw from your life experience when you're writing? Because I know write what you know kind of thing, but how
yeah.
often do you use that?
Not as often as I might, especially if I was to be right, because a lot of I haven't written much in a while because I am mostly working on elegant literature. And I miss it a lot. So getting to write the prompts every month is a great creative outlet for me. And attending the Author HQ education classes that we have, whenever they're workshops, I get to write and share it. And I noticed, I mean, last week I definitely pulled some things from my own life because that was part of the workshop, was to not necessarily pull from your own life, but incorporate news of the day. And I had to, especially when you're writing quickly. Like you have 15 minutes to write this little segment. Like the fastest way to do that is to be pulling things from your own life and injecting as much of the things that you're familiar with as possible rather than creating something brand new. Most of what I write on my own time is very much sort of the fantasy science fiction things. And so there's not a whole lot of writing about, my city block or anything like that. But there is always pulling from interactions I've had with people or seen people have with each other, or it's basically things like that. There's a massive note on my phone that is just things I observe as I go about my day, and kind of find interesting and think maybe that could be story fodder, and pop it down in the notebook. And so a lot of the write what you know advice is definitely geared to emotions that I think, rather than like situations. Like, what's not like I could totally write a scene where a guy was being broken up with while he was naked without ever having been broken up with while I was naked, because I might be familiar with the emotions of sort of awkwardness and embarrassment and then shame and things like that, and the anger of the woman and the absurdity of the situation. I've been in absurd situations. I've done things that I have totally regretted. There are right, like the right what you know is very much write the emotions that you know and the relationships that you know, much more than don't include dragons in your story because you don't know anything about dragons. Um, it's definitely not like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, totally. I pull things. I think
Yeah.
we all do. Rare is the author who, literally lives in a hut and never interacts with the outside world and has no experiences of their own, yet writes
Yeah.
deep philosophical pieces on the human nature. You need experiences for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. I had a question. We're coming towards the end, so a couple more questions. I think we've really got into the story, and I want to know a little bit more about you. So one of my questions to lead this off is, what's the fiction scene like in Romania? Like, are you online and interacting with people on the international stage primarily, or have you sought out writing groups or anything like that within Romania?
No, so I haven't looked at any writing groups or anything like that. Actually, I don't have a social media presence. I don't really exist on social media. I nobody knows that I even write these short stories. It is not something that I share with anyone. It was, and mostly because of I wanted to get some sort of you know confirmation. Basically, we're all looking for validation in what we do, so I didn't necessarily wanted to go ask for feedback from people that I don't know, because I think that can be dangerous, right? If you post it on Reddit and you if you feel
Yeah.
bad about your writing, you'll get destroyed. You'll never write
Yeah.
again. Or that's why I was kind of thinking about asking for feedback from professionals. And by professionals, I mean you don't have to be, a published
Yeah.
uh, author, but somebody who is a very good reader, somebody who can make a distinction between personal preference and the actual craft of writing stories. So I stayed away from pretty much everything. I just try to see if I can develop some sort of critical eye on my own, and then start polishing that critical eye that I can develop on my own by then finding some groups of professionals or experienced writers or experienced editors or experienced readers that can help me kind of continue to develop this critical eye. But it was important for me to kind of know if what I think a good story is actually a good story. So before anything else, so I wanted to do it before talking about it, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely makes sense. And I think you're right to do that for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, if you're kind of brand new to a craft, seeking out the community to judge your very early work before you've got any skill on your own is counterproductive because it's a method of procrastination and you're too impressionable at that point. You don't know what you don't know. And so everybody will give you different advice and you'll be, and then you're starting off by following other people's advice rather than following what interests you and what
Uh-huh.
you think is right. It's better to, yeah, but going too far that way can get you set in habits that aren't necessarily great and set you back, or have been a bit of a waste of time. So there's a balance of you gotta work on your craft yourself. Make sure that you have enough interest to pursue it, and then kind of get a community together. So now you are not only a published author, you are an award-winning author. So it might be time to get a social media presence if that interests you, and it might be
Yeah.
time to get involved in a community where they're all going to be saying, "Hey, give me feedback on my work because you're an award-winning author." We
Yeah.
don't need to give you feedback. You need to give us feedback.
I think we all need feedback from the
Of course.
right people all the time. I definitely would love to hear, from other writers. I don't know anyone else who writes, so I would love
Well,
to hear from someone.
yeah. Well, fortunately, we live in a digital age that can connect us across borders and around the world, so we're no longer isolated to our little hamlets where nobody understands us and nobody is like-minded. So one of the things Elegant Literature does is we have a community that's online that is on Discord, and we have people chat about writing, people get together to in writing groups, they share their work, get feedback. We have different channels for positive only, like just proofreading, so just get fix up your typos and stuff. Positive feedback only, so it's just like nice things in case you just want to feel good boost. And we have one for tear it to shreds, which is
Oh,
rip it
yeah.
apart, make it better. You need to tear it apart to make it the best it can be, which is a very popular channel. We got a few hundred people involved in that. Excuse me. We got a few hundred people involved in that community. And well, I would recommend to you, and we'll talk about this after the call, but well, I would recommend to you to come join us and
Sure.
meet some fellow writers and share some work and hopefully use it to continue boosting your long-term career because your writing is fantastic. And if you are enjoying it and you continue to pursue the craft and look for publications, I expect you will certainly succeed. And so a community can only help that at this point in the writing. So we'll talk about that. But for everybody else as well who's watching this and made it this far in the call, we have a great community. We have a great magazine. We have a great education system with some wonderful award-winning educators that come on and teach you all about the craft and the skill of writing and all about the business of publishing and making a career out of being an author. So come check that out. What else did I have to ask you? I guess my normal question of when did you start writing is already been answered by like a couple of months ago when you started submitting to Elegant Literature. As a child, did
Yeah, it
you
was
ever have the desire to write as a child or growing up or anything like that? Or is this a very new aspect of your life?
it's a very new aspect, to be honest. Now that I think about it, I when I was a kid, I used to write things down, but again, it was just a way of understanding stuff. For me, it was just writing down, and I think that's why it kind of translated into my nonfiction writing. Um, and I think it's about 8 months ago because I submitted to Elegantly once every 2 months. That's the deadline that I put on myself. I didn't want to put any pressure. I said I'm not gonna submit to each contest. I'm gonna take my time. So about 8 months ago, I I just felt like I need some sort of joy and fun to find some joy and fun from writing and I was actually starting to read a lot more and I found that um, I try to understand what works, what makes that scene work, and I was thinking about, well, I think this author felt great then when he wrote that, so I started doing that, and yeah, 8 months ago it was when I kind of try if try and see if fiction is something that I would find joy in, and that's the most important thing for me. I just for me it shows that I find that just finding the right words and working on a line and trying to polish that and making it work and making it interesting. I find that it brings a lot of satisfaction and I really enjoy it. So that's the biggest win that I got
Yeah.
from
And
this whole transition.
I think enjoying the writing also comes through in the writing. Like you come up with, the more fun ideas and you have a fun with the writing and you're obviously very particular about the words, very thoughtful about it, but having fun while you do it makes, if you're not having any fun, the reader's probably not going to have any fun, but you're having a great
Of
time, your
course.
story is having a great time. I had a great time reading it. So I think it's working. I hope you continue to find joy in it, which leads me to one of my final questions is if I could send you 5, 10 years into the future, how does writing fit into your life? Like, would you love it to become a career of its own where you're making money from just writing, or is it always going to be a hobby that just sort of brings you joy? Do you want to keep it low key in your life, or do you want to grow and see where it goes? What's the ideal position in 5 or 10 years with writing in regards to your life?
I would love it to make it a career and a full-time job, just because I think it's one of the most ridiculous careers that you can choose. I think that just thinking of, and I mean that in a positive way, of course, but just thinking of the timelines, right? You learn the craft for years and years. You got to get an agent, and the agent is you're going to be receiving rejection after rejection. That's what you kind of hear from everyone. So just because I think it would be so challenging that I would 100% go for it and try to make a career out of it. Um, and at the moment, I think I would enjoy it immensely just because I enjoyed writing these little stories. So kind of going big or full time on it, I think it would it would be just great.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, your writing quality is high. You're at the beginning of your journey, but you are already a published author. You're already an award winner. And if you keep up, 5, 10 years from now, I see no reason why you couldn't be sort of well into a career of being an author. I certainly would read your work. I thought this was fantastic stuff. Yeah.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
so. How do you was elegant literature? Do you feel like elegant literature was a good place to start your journey? Did it help you? Would you recommend it to other people? And could you please say elegant literature when you answer this so I can include it as a testimonial?
No, I mean it's I think it's the only place that I found. So the magazine is great. So what elegant literature gives is not just, like an opportunity. It provides a real opportunity because first of all, the amount of money that authors receive. So you get, if you get published, you get paid as a professional writer. If you win the grand prize, it's like, I think it's one of the biggest ones that I've seen from a medium-sized magazine. So it's, and more than that, I feel like it's such a friendly environment that brings writers in, because that's why what attracted me towards that. It helps you because as an unpublished author, or maybe uh, when you're beginning your journey as a writer, it gives you some sort of structure by providing a prompt, providing a deadline, which are incredibly important. um, you get like the support, like you said, from the community if needed. um, and also you are being treated as an author, and it feels like, from at least from what I've seen before, some publications feel so elitist, so you're almost like, I don't want to, try there, because it's like, we're going to wait. You're going to find out after 12 months if we're going to read it or if we're going to publish it. So you're almost starting with a rejection. And that's not what I felt with elegant literature. I thought that it was something that was realistically a goal that I could achieve by continually submitting and working with Elegant. I thought it was great, and obviously for me, it's the only place that I submitted to, and the only place that I got published. So I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity. I think it's a great environment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And it was a goal that you could achieve. You've achieved it. You won the award. And I hope that you go on to win more awards and get published in lots more magazines. And I have no doubt that you will. Um, do you have any parting advice for anybody watching this? And I know you mentioned imposter syndrome when we got on the call.
Yeah.
And I know you've only submitted 4 times. Only one has been published, but it did win an award. And you're now kind of, and also listening to you speak through this whole interview has been enlightening. Like you're very thoughtful about it. You're approaching the craft conscientiously and with a lot of intention. You're employing strategies. You're working at getting, you're obviously working at doing the best you can. So do you have any parting advice for anybody who's watching this who might want to, follow in your shoes? What helped you in the last 8 months as you've been writing? What was one of the biggest helps to you to get yourself started and polish your craft?
I think the main thing is just be kind to yourself. Don't put pressure on yourself. The world puts enough pressure on you. So if it's something that brings you joy, just go for it. If you enjoy writing, go for it. Who cares if, people on the internet will say it's bad? It doesn't matter. That's not the point when you are starting out, or when you are an unpublished author, or when you are trying stuff up. So just be kind to yourself. Um, don't set any crazy expectations. Do it for the joy that it brings you. Um, and just keep in mind that the finishing line is having something finished, not perfect. And you're gonna have a lot of time to make something perfect, but just try to finish something, see how that goes. So those would be my advice. I mean, my advice, yeah, just be kind to yourself, find joy in writing, write what you enjoy. Don't try to be something that you're not. Um, and if you continue to do that, I'm sure that your work will get not even better, but will get recognized. At least that's what worked for me. So
Fantastic. Well, you're definitely, it sounds like you're taking your own advice and you're working at the craft and it's paying off for you. These stories are great. Adrian, thank you very much. Congratulations once again. You are the award winner. You're the recipient of the Elegant Literature. I should say the full thing, shouldn't I? The Elegant Literature Award for New Writers. It's a $3,000 grand prize. Your story, Nigel, has been published in the 46th issue of Elegant Literature, Timeless Tears. Everybody watching this, you can go read that for free. It is a fantastic story. And come join us at Elegant Literature, especially if you are a new writer yet to get any publications or you've just got one or two. We are here to help you take those first steps to becoming a professional writer, getting your stories published, getting your first dollar from writing, and maybe even winning an award like Adrian. Adrian, congratulations.
thank you so much, Ron. It's a great experience. I'll continue to read and submit to the magazine. It's been an amazing experience. So I'm grateful and I appreciate the opportunity, Craig.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a wonderful day.